Hi guys, today we're going to do a chat application, very simple one-to-one communication between server and client. We're going to cover basics of network operations, network I/O, and network programming. And this is going to be it because network programming in itself is kind of complex topic to cover. You don't need to have any network programming background. We're going to take it very slowly and I'll try to cover everything line by line. And I will also deliberately omit a few things so that we're keeping things as simple as possible. Okay, so we'll start off by creating a new package and we'll call the package chat. And we'll create an entry point to the program, as we always do, chat app. So we're extending JavaFX application. In the main method, we are going to launch our program and show it. So basically, yeah, just testing our application, that it works and stuff. So since we're going to focus on network I/O, I'm just going to define UI very quickly and get it out the way using create content. Since it is a basic chat application, we're going to have a text area and a text field. Text area, call it messages. Our root node is going to be vertical blocks. Root UV blocks, spacing 20, messages, and we also need a text field. Call it input. Going to import that as well and return a root. Preferred size 600 by 600 and messages set preferred height 550 or something. Alright, let's see how that works. So we've got our text area. This is where we're going to see our messages coming from the other end. And this is where we're going to type our messages. That's it for the UI part. Now as for networking, we will create a class called network connection. It's going to be an abstract class, and when we're dealing with complex things like I/O or external resources or database, it is useful to have an abstraction layer or an interface through which you'll communicate with the rest of the program. So for now, we're going to create a sort of a function that allows us to pass in a function that is going to be called when we receive a message from the other end. It is consumer because we are the ones who are consuming the object. So we're going to create a constructor that takes that function or method and serializable means that the default Java serialization mechanism can automatically serialize an object into an array of bytes and send that over the network or save it in a file or something. Okay, so we are the ones consuming the message of type serializable, and then we can do lots of things with that message, but the most basic thing is just show on the screen. Alright, as you can see, we're just instantiating this function method we are not doing anything network related. So we need to have a start connection method, which might throw an exception. Then we'll have send, obviously, because we need to be able to send data. Throws exception. And close the connection. Just close. Start connection, close connection to be symmetric. Okay, now we need to also define a new thread. We briefly covered in one of the previous tutorials the idea of threads and parallel execution. So things like writing and reading from a socket or from a stream cannot happen one after the other. It has to be simultaneous so that you are able to write and read. Otherwise, you'll be waiting for another method to complete, which is not the best way of doing that. So this is one of the ways of creating a new thread, just extending classical thread. Since we're not doing any background thread, UI thread communication, we don't really need to use tasks or services from JavaFX, so we're just going with an old-fashioned way of creating a thread. Public void run. This is the function. This is the method that we override in order to implement, in order to make the thread execute the code within it on a different thread, on a different background thread. So this is where we're going to do the network stuff. But before we do that, I'm going to use the same class for server and the client, although you should ideally have different implementation for server and client so that they do different things if you want to. But since we're keeping it simple, it's going to be in the same class, and then we simply override a few things to say whether we are server or client. Boolean is server, so it's just a Boolean function, a method that returns true or false depending on whether we're server or client. We need to be able, first of all, IP. We need to get IP. For server, it doesn't really matter, but for client, it does, because we need to be able to find the server and connect to it. Get port. For server, this is going to be the port on which to listen for connections. On client, this is going to be the port on which to try to connect the server. Server socket, server. So if is server, question mark, this is the sort of shortened if statement, or if else statement. Is server, then we instantiate new server socket with the port. Else null, because on the client we don't need to have a server socket. And this is the socket from the other end, or representation of the other end connection. Is server, then server accept. So this is a blocking call. This will wait for the connection before it starts. It proceeds with the code execution. In the client, we're going to create a new socket with IP address and port. And this IP address and the port are of servers, so we're trying to connect to the server using this constructor of socket. While if we're the server, we're accepting the connection from the client. So the code is kind of similar. We also need object output stream. Since we're sending objects, we might as well use object streams out. New object stream. Make sure to define object stream before you start working with the input stream, because it might get blocked. Get output stream. and then the input stream. So output stream is the stream where we send objects, and input stream when we're the stream where we receive objects. Get input stream. Import all of those things. What else? It's a try with resources. So we need to catch that. It's probably one or more brackets missing. Oh yeah, there's one more. Okay, so that's quite a statement, but it is actually easier to do this because then we don't need to define a finally block, and we don't need to worry about streams and sockets being closed after the after we're done with them, because everything is going to be done automatically because of the try with resources block. Alright, the first thing we're going to do, we need to have access to socket outside so that we're able to close it, and we also need to have access to object output stream. Output stream out. So we're going to assign these things. We also need to disable the buffering. This will just send messages quicker without waiting for the buffer to get full. And this is essentially an infinite loop, although it is kind of bad to have an infinite loop, but it kind of is because we're just accepting messages and handling them. So this is essentially a reading connection thread. The sending will happen on the JavaFX application thread, although ideally we need to have another thread called write thread or something. What else? Oh yeah, we also need to remember to set this thread to daemon true so that this thing will not block JVM from exiting, but we'll do that in a while. Serializable data. So this is the stuff we receive from the other end. We can typecast it to serializable because we know it's going to be serializable. We sent it in read object. Finally, we're going to handle the stuff with onReceive callback. OnReceive callback accept data. So this will basically call the function that we're going to pass in and pass this as the argument to that function, allowing us to do whatever we want with it. If there is an exception, we are going to say connection closed because there's nothing else we can do really. Connection closed. I think that is all for this part. Start connection. Oh yeah, we need to create our thread. Connection thread. This just creates an object. It doesn't do anything else. The actual, oh yeah, this is where we set it to daemon thread. So it's not going to block execution, exiting from JVM. Start connection, we are going to call the start method of the thread, which will spawn a new thread and start executing this on that thread. Send connection thread out, write object. So this is where we send our object using this output stream, which from the other end of connection will be handled by input stream and passed to the callback. Close connection, connection thread socket close. If there is an exception, then it will be thrown back sort of upwards, and it will be handled by the application. All right, now we need to implement those few methods. Class server, class client. Because most of the logic is already here, server and client won't have much code in them. They extend network connection, and we implement those things. Extends network connection, and again constructor and implementation. We'll start from the server. Super calls the constructor of the superclass, which is that one. So it initializes unreceived callback, so it's all good. For the server, we only need a port on which to listen for incoming connections. Port, this port is server should return true because of this server class. Get IP, we don't care. Get port, return port. So you know our connection is server will return true, server socket get port, accept, yeah, it's all good. For the client, we need an IP address of the server and int port, which we take in the constructor IP and port. This server returns false, get IP returns IP, and port returns port. Okay, we've got the implementation, I think. Now what else? Now back to our application. We need to create network connection using the type of network connection, which is the abstract superclass, and we don't really care about the actual instantiation of the object connection. And we can control the instantiation by just doing this is server, because we're using the same application. I'm just going to change this flag and then rerun the application on the same machine. So if it's is server, let's create a few methods that return. One returns server, create server, which is just going to return new server. IP is port 55555, and we will need to pass a consumer function that does something with the data, and that data, if you remember, is going to be received from the other end, which we can so we ideally need to append this to the messages. Oh yeah, also don't forget to run this using platform that will run later, because that is a background thread. So in its essence, it's a different thread to JavaFX application thread, or also known as UI thread. And this UI thread is the only thread on which we can manipulate UI objects. And because this is being called from background thread, we need to call platform.runLater to give the control back to the UI thread. And messages, append text data to string. Because it is an object, it is not a string, it's a serializable object, so it could be anything that implements serializable. To string the new line symbol, and yeah, that'll do. Create server and create client that returns a client. Return new client. This is the IP address of the local host, or the same machine, basically. So if you're using multiple machines on the same network, you will need to type internal IP address here. If you're using this program over the internet, then you'll need to type external IP of the server. And it's going to be the same here as well. We just append to the list of messages. We could also write this, so that's from server, or we could embed that into the object that we're sending. Yeah, it might be better. Right, so if is server, then create server, else create client. Now we're going to override a few things from the JavaFX application class. First of all, init, which also throws an exception and is handled somewhere else. And this init method will be called before the start, and it is being called by the framework, JavaFX framework, so we don't do it manually. And not doing it manually is always most of the time better than doing it manually. And stop. So in init, we start the connection. In stop, we stop the connection or close the connection. And that is it, really. So we can receive messages, which will do this. Oh yeah, we need to be able to send messages, and we can do this by adding an action listener to our input field. So this is the code to be executed when we hit enter on input text field. So string message, if it is the server, then the message will start server, else client. We'll need to append input text, input get text. We then clear the input. We append it to the list of messages locally. So append text message. The new line operator. And finally we send it. Connection, send, message. Class string is, as you can see, it implements serializable, so we can send strings just like that without worrying about anything else. Try catch block, exception, messages, append, say an exception occurred or something. Or failed to send. Alright, that looks like it might be working. Let's try it out. So we'll start as the server first. Then we'll start as a client. So that is the server on the left and the client on the right. So the server will say hi. And as you can see, it works, which is great. So this is the server application, and whenever we say something, it first does this, which appends text to itself locally, and then it sends that message over the network, and that network connection's other end is a client. So the client receives it and displays it on its own thing because of this. Now let's do something with client. Hi, I'm client. And as you can see, it also sends that string back to the server. So essentially we now have a very basic server client application, that sort of chat application, which is one of the basic programs that you do in network programming 101, I think, because it's quite easy to implement. But it covers a lot of things like reading from socket, writing to a socket, so basic network operations. And yeah, this is pretty much it. So if we close that, it'll probably say it says connection closed, but we know that it's gone to an exception, and we simply handled the exception in kind of a graceful way by saying just connection closed. Right, so that was it. We've written a very basic chat application. A few days ago, Gluon have released an Eclipse plugin to we're able to port our JavaFX programs applications to mobile very easily using Gluon application. And this is something I might cover in the next tutorial. Yeah, we'll see about that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and subscribe if you liked.